This is Garis Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 277, entitled My Men's Lib Intellectual Trajectory. Description. This flyer describes my men's lib intellectual trajectory, consisting of 3 phases. 1. The Fluffie Parasite phase. 2. The MGTOW Psychology phase. And 3. The Masculist Synthesis phase. And the flyer itself. I always have trouble centering it. It's too sensitive. Still haven't got it. It swings wildly from side. It doesn't do it smoothly. Okay. My Men's Lib Intellectual Trajectory by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer explains my intellectual development, that is, the progression of ideas I've had regarding men's lib, that's masculism. It went through 3 major phases, which I label here. 1. The Fluffie Parasite phase. 2. The MGTOW Psychology phase. 3. The Masculist Synthesis phase. 1. The Fluffie Parasite phase. My first phase in men's lib thinking was my Fluffie Parasite phase, and it remains my most important idea, that is, that women oppress men by being financial parasites of men, by not bothering to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, financially independent persons, by bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and university, so that they can be FIPs as adults and not parasite off the money of a man. Fluffies are traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man. The word fluffy is obviously based on the word fluff, with connotations of being light, not serious, not responsible, not adult, not career competent, not FIP. Masculists, men's libbers, see fluffies as manslavers, and think that manslavery is slavery, that slavery rouses passions, that slavery is a war issue, and the masculists are at war against the fluffies, aiming to wipe them out, not by killing them, but by ignoring them to death, a slow death, forcing fluffies to rot on the shelf by men giving them zero attention, not even pumping and dumping them, forcing their fluffy parasite genes to be removed from the gene pool. In short, masculists hate fluffies. Fluffies are the enemy of the masculists. Masculists are very conscious that so many of men's gender issues could be solved if we lived in what the masculists call the FIP society, capital F, capital S. That is, one in which both sexes, especially young women, are socialized by their parents and educated by their teachers to be FIPs, putting heavy moral pressure on young women to FIP up or pay a very heavy price of not getting a man, so that they will lead miserable lives by being manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and poor, spat at by men and by society. Masculists see that with nearly all women FIPs, the current atrocities that are occurring daily in the fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce courts could be removed, because the divorce laws could be made men fair far more easily with women being FIPs and not fluffies. In today's world, 3/4 of young women still choose to be fluffies by choosing to study the soft option at age 16, that is, the intellectually easy, intellectually lazy option of memory-based subjects like languages, English literature, history, etc., and not the tougher analytic subjects like math and the sciences, which will give students a real skill that is rewarded by the economy, whereas the fluffy crap subjects that most women study will cause them to end up with a fluffy crap diploma that the economy does not value, so that these fluffy crappers will then look around for some gullible manslave to parasite upon in their 30s when their biological clock is ticking hard because they are unable to afford to buy their own middle-class house due to their fluffy crap salaries. Fluffies are terrified of the idea that men will not be manslaves for them, paying for women to have babies. If most men refused to pay for women, then women would be forced to become fips or starve. That is the power of masculism. The masculists are very conscious that men have the financial power to force women to fip up, because a fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some manslave to have him pay for her to sit on her fat parasitic ass and live off his money, not working, and raising her kids in his house that he pays for. Fluffies are also terrified of the masculist idea of the para, that is, the paternity rejection right, that is, the legal right of a man to reject an unwanted pregnancy, so that if the mother continues with the pregnancy and does not abort the fetus, then she bears full financial responsibility for the kid. The fact that women have a MARA, maternity rejection right, that gives them the legal right to reject an unwanted pregnancy, but men don't have a para, is the most blatant form of sexual discrimination against men that makes masculists extremely angry, because so many millions of men have their lives ruined by criminally minded fluffies who lie to their boyfriends/husbands about taking the pill, then accidentally, on purpose, get pregnant by neglecting to take the pill for a few days, and then slam a paternity suit on the father, forcing him to pay for the kid, even though he didn't want it. This is criminality of a high order, and makes masculists really hate fluffies who do this. When the masculists get the para, fluffies will be forced to pay for their own kids. In brackets. Hey, femalian, if you want to have a kid, you'll have to pay for it yourself. In bracket. And this will force women to be fips in order to be able to afford to pay for their own kids. That is, in concrete terms, for a nanny to look after the kid while they are at work, earning their big bucks from their careers that they got well qualified for. Thus, masculism threatens the very survival of fluffies, aiming for their extinction, wiping them out, so that women are forced through tremendous moral pressure from men and society to fip up, to become moral, responsible adults, or are pariahed, shunned, rejected by society and by men, so that they are punished by simply not getting a man. The above ideas are the core of masculist thinking, and remain so despite the additions of the latter two phases. 2. The MGTOW Psychology phase. I was a very active masculist in the early 80s in Europe, getting on the media in 4 languages, in half a dozen countries, several hundred times, preaching masculist ideas, that is, those given above. But for 3 decades I was no longer a masculist. I simply stopped being active. Why was that? Because I kept reading about the massive influx of women into the workforce, into the universities and the professions, for example, medicine, dentistry, law, architecture, etc. I thought, good, women are fipping up, so there's no more real need for masculism. So my motivation to be politically and particularly media active dwindled away to nothing. For 30 years I was an ex-masculist, thinking that the masculist problem had been essentially solved because women were fipping up in vast numbers. Case closed. However, a few years ago I came across a video by Sandman, who called himself a MGTOW, men going their own way, and started listening to more of them, and became conscious that men were still being screwed in the divorce courts by hypocritical, fluffy feminists, and that sparked my interest in masculism again. I began to write 2-3-page essays on MGTOW masculist themes that I called flyers, and then started putting them up on YouTube and lately Minds.com for the world to see. I became conscious that I had failed to see that the feminists were still fluffies in their attitudes towards men. That is, they still saw men as cash machines to be exploited by women to force men to pay for women to have babies. Most women are not conscious of the awful hypocrisy inherent in fluffy feminism. That is, pushing for equal rights for women, but rejecting equal obligations for women. That is, sharing equally the burden of earning the living with men, not parasiting on men, accepting the moral obligation of fipping up and getting a career-competent education so that women can be fips as adults and not parasite off a man. Thus, as a masculist, I saw the fluffy feminists as hypocrites and was sharply critical of them. So I became an active masculist again, writing my flyers. And when I leave China a year from now, where I have lived for the past 11 years, I will push the broadcast media to spread masculist ideas to the millions to liberate men and put enormous moral pressure on women to fip up. By listening to Sandman and other major YouTube content providers in the MGTOW movement, I became more aware of female psychology, especially two essential MGTOW ideas, that is, the red pill and female hypergamy. The red pill is the idea that women don't love men. They love men's sexploitability. If a man loses his exploitability by a woman, then she will coldly, disloyally dump him and give her vagina quickly to another man who has higher sexploitability, who can give her and her babies more resources, thus increasing her chances in the distant past of surviving. Closely related to the red pill idea is that of hypergamy, that is, the tendency of a woman to be always on the lookout for a more sexploitable male, whom she can monkey branch to, coldly and disloyally, who will give her more resources if the opportunity realistically presents itself. MGTOW made me conscious that women's nature, women's psychology, that makes perfect Darwinian sense, is not in men's self-interest. Women survived in the past by exploiting men, bribing men with access to their vagina in exchange for scarce, male-hunted meat. I listened to a lot of MGTOW videos and got educated into female psychology. It's on the psychological front that I feel I learned something from the MGTOWs. My earlier Fluffie Parasite phase was weaker in awareness of female nature than what the MGTOWs were presenting to the public, so I felt I learned from the MGTOWs and absorbed their teachings into my more politically minded masculism. 3. The Masculist Synthesis phase. As a masculist, however, I was always sharply critical and cynical of the MGTOWs for their lack of political activism, their indifference to the gender plight of other men, their passive apoliticality, their lack of solidarity with other men. I remain hostile towards MGTOWs for this major failing of theirs, in my view. But MGTOW psychological teachings changed me. I now see women in a different light. I am much more suspicious of women now, thinking that if a woman shows an interest in me, my now MGTOW-based instinctive reaction is to think, quote, "What does she want from me? How does she hope to exploit me? Does she want my resources? Is she just another bloody fluffy parasite, a fluffy feminist hypocrite?" I felt that too many of the MGTOWs were into psychology and not enough into politics, so became increasingly frustrated by the apoliticality of the MGTOWs and distanced myself from them, even though their psychological teachings had definitely influenced me. So I began to wonder how to incorporate MGTOW teachings and the very existence of the MGTOW movement into my masculist politics. One of the most prominent of MGTOW YouTubers is TFM, Turd Flinging Monkey, who's one of the most intelligent of the MGTOWs. He claims that it's a waste of time for men to be political, aiming to men-fair the gender laws, men-fairing the divorce laws, bringing in the para, etc., because of what he calls the 51% female voter argument. That is, the idea that even if the men's lib movement went strongly masculist and pushed hard for the men-fairing of the gender laws, at the end of the day, all that male energy and effort would be wasted because the majority of voters are female, who will female block vote for the upkeep of the men unfair gender laws, particularly in the divorce courts, where women are so heavily favoured. TFM's argument I found persuasive, so wondered how to get around it, because if he remains correct, then men's lib is doomed to political impotence, leaving men only the MGTOW option as a reaction against fluffy feminist oppression and their exploitation of men's resources. Some months ago, I had an epiphany, one of the best masculist ideas I've had in years, which went as follows. To force the gender politicians to men-fair the gender laws, it's necessary to raise the proportion of voters who want the gender laws men-faired to about 60%. Then the gender politicians will be afraid not to men-fair the gender laws through fear of being voted out by the voting majority. But there are more voters who are female than male, so how to reach the 60% figure? My epiphany was to have the idea, quote, by converting women to become female masculists, end quote. How to do that? By using a two-pronged approach, that is the carrot and the stick. The carrot would be simply to present masculist ideas on the broadcast media, teaching women how men are oppressed by fluffy parasitism, and how badly men are being hurt in the female feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce courts. Some women will be sympathetic to men's gender plight and become female masculists for the same kind of reason that many men are sympathetic to feminism, believing that women should have equal pay, the abortion right, equal access to the professions, etc. The stick, which is probably a far more effective motivator for women to become female masculists, is to scare them with manlessness and babylessness by using MGTOW strategies of avoiding women as a political tool of the masculists. Thus I began to see MGTOW as a branch, a subset, a political tool of the masculists. The MGTOWs are definitely increasing in numbers as more and more men are waking up to the reality of having a 1 in 4 chance of being financially massacred and having their lives ruined in the divorce courts if they are stupid enough and gullible enough to marry and have kids. There are now millions of MGTOWs. That MGTOW reality gives the masculists a powerful new weapon to use against women, to force women to vote together with men to men-fair the gender laws, so that men can be liberated from man-slavery, and so that humanity does not get wiped out due to the paternity strike created by the MGTOWs, that is, 2/3 of young men under 35 who refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. So, I began to see that the masculists have two main messages for women. 1. Fip up. 2. Vote together with men to men-fair the gender laws. This double-barreled approach of the masculists, that is, pushing women to fip up and to vote with men, overcomes TFM's female voter argument. It's the breakthrough that allows men to feel that it is not a waste of time to push for the men-fairing of the gender laws, to liberate men from man-slavery, to greatly increase the quality of men's lives. So I felt that this synthesis of A, Fluffie Parasite masculism, with B, the MGTOW threat of manlessness and babylessness, was an important one that forms the core strategy of modern masculism. That is, the royal road to men's lib. It is the strategy I work with now and push in my masculist videos. Once you become convinced that masculism is not a dead horse, that it has the power and the potential to liberate men, then millions of men can become politically active, angry masculists who push women to fip up and to vote with men by educating them and scaring them with masculist/MGTOW ideas. The Masculists have so much work to do that now that the way ahead is clear. We first have to increase our numbers, and we do that via the internet videos on YouTube, and increasingly with Minds.com, which does not censor nor demonetizes as does YouTube. The next step for the Masculists is to get the broadcast media on our side. We are men, and hence half the population, so men's lib issues are very important. If the media does not listen to masculism and MGTOW ideas, then the MGTOWs will continue to boycott paternity, and hence will wipe out whole populations due to the crash in the birth rate they are causing. So the media have to listen sooner or later. Once the media people are on board with masculism, the masses can be taught of masculist/MGTOW ideas, convincing women to FIP up and to vote with men. Men's lib groups need to be established in every high school to exert strong moral pressure on young women to FIP up and stop studying fluffy crap subjects, threatening them with manlessness and babylessness later in life if they don't FIP up and pull their financial weight and not expect to be able to parasite off a man in their 30s. Men's lib groups need to be set up on every campus, pushing women to study FIP majors, e.g. STEM, and the professions, so that they can earn decent salaries, that is, be FIPs as adults, and not become hated fluffies, that is, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin, so hated by the masculists. As the media really gets on board with masculist ideas, and so does society in general, young women will feel the moral pressure to FIP up, coming from all sides, from parents, from teachers, from boys, from the media, from society in general. It will be impossible for them to ignore it. Men's studies need to be taught at universities, and many books need to be written on the topic of men's lib, as many have been written on women's issues. Men are half the population, and women certainly do not have a monopoly on gender issues. Women oppress men too, as is clear with the fluffy parasitism of men, the manslavery of men, and the need for men to free themselves from that manslavery by forcing women to FIP up or be punished by men, by women not getting one. As the social pressure for the gender laws to be men-fared mounts and mounts, the gender politicians will feel the heat and be motivated to change the laws to restore a balance between the sexes so that men are treated fairly, unlike today's heavily biased gender laws that favour women and are so destructive of men's lives that scream out for reform. In time, the gender laws will be men-fared, and men will become more willing to be fathers again, because they will not face the awful risk that is the case in today's world of being financially massacred and have their lives destroyed in the fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce courts, nor be forced to pay for a kid he did not want through a lack of a legal para, etc. Gender politicians need to men-fair the gender laws across the board, looking systematically at a long list of legal and social discriminations against men, and then men-fair them. There's a lot at stake here. The current gender men unfair gender system cannot continue. If it does, then we wipe ourselves out within a century, if one does the math. The current MGTOW created paternity boycott is crashing the birth rate and will wipe out whole populations, so society has to listen to men's issues and act on them, otherwise it commits suicide. New section. The above three phases are the main points in my men's lib intellectual development, my men's lib intellectual trajectory. So I hope you found them interesting and convincing, so that you too will become a masculist and start pushing politically for men's lib. There is so much to be done, as elaborated upon above. The first step is to be convinced that the way above is now clear, so that the first political steps can be taken. I believe in time masculism will be seen by future historians to be seen as important to men as feminism was to women. Men are half the population, the superior half. Men invent everything, build everything, create everything, so need to be listened to. Men are the creators of culture. Women merely parasite off it, and are only tolerated by men due to women's monopoly of womb and vagina. But even these are being replaced soon by the sex bots and the art wombs, that's artificial wombs, so that women will not